Today we're here to talk about communication. I'm going to go through kind of the plan for the day like we did last time, so we got no surprises, everybody's on the same page, and we will then dig into the material together. But this is meant to be the follow-on to the active listening. So if we move forward, active listening was last time on October 1st. We talked about how to receive information effectively. And that was about how do we create the environment so that other people can share what they're experiencing and feeling towards us so we can understand what they're trying to communicate better and more effectively. Because if you recall, we had that kind of funnel image, and it was 93% of what we communicate is not words, meaning we don't have to say anything to still communicate a boatload of information. And so that's kind of where active listening comes in, is that we kind of create an environment where we're able to receive all of that. Today we're going to talk about effective communication. That's how do we transmit information back to other folks. Whether or not they're active listening is out of our control. But we do have ways to understand how people communicate to us and how we can then reflect back to them and communicate with them. And then we're going to bring that all together on November 5th, and we're going to talk about conflict resolution, which is kind of the overarching theme of this work. And that's going to be how do we handle those difficult conversations that kind of create a pit in our stomach and that we may otherwise maybe tend to avoid or not want to take on. We can take them on, and we can do so in a way that's safe and productive and actually creates trust with somebody when we're done. And so that's the overarching goal when we get done. Karen, to my left, you're right. I'm Brian. I won't belabor and take time introducing us. We're very grateful to be here. Today we're going to talk about active listening a bit. We're just going to review for the couple of people who weren't there and just to refresh everybody's memory. But I'm sure you've all been practicing. Your kids are probably like, we're done. I don't want to hear about it anymore. I get it. My daughter's the same way. And then we're going to talk about the 4 core communication styles, and we're going to go into some detail about what each one is, when and where they may or may not be appropriate, and how to see them and identify them yourself. And then we're going to talk about how to interact with those styles, because they're out there. And believe it or not, you all have a dominant style, but you don't only communicate in that style. We all float in and out of these 4 styles all day long based on the context and the needs that we're coming to that interaction with. So let's talk back about integrated listening. If you recall, integrated listening is what we wrapped up with last time, and that was bringing together all of the skills we had talked about. Does anybody want to share with the group the overarching goal of active listening? What was the one thing that active listening, how do we define that? Does anybody remember? I'm going to crack this group. I got one more session after today. I got time today and I got one more session. I have a hand. So those are some of the behaviors that active listening helps foster, right? So we heard eye contact, nodding, kind of affirming somebody communicating with you that you're hearing them and you're understanding what they're saying. The overarching goal of active listening, this was a sentence on the last slide. The goal of active listening is to seek to understand, not respond, right? The goal is maybe to not even say anything, just to let someone know that you've heard them. You can acknowledge what they've told you, and you're not trying to offer up your perspective at all. It's just to receive theirs. Again, that's the receiving of information. So to do that, we focus on somebody, we give them our full attention, phones go away, we possibly avoid an email and walk down the hall to talk to them, right? We give them that personal connection, the ability to make eye contact. We connect through that personal connection, whether it be a video call instead of an email, or walking down the hall, or walking down the street, or cracking into, was it 1880? Is that where that's the fortress? Yeah. We're gonna get in there too. If anybody's cracked in, let me know. And then we want to empathize. Once we've made that connection, we want to try and understand that shared experience. If you can connect what they're going through to something that you've gone through, you're going to have a different ability to appreciate what that person has experienced. And lastly, balance. We were just talking about this before the session. If someone else has escalated, do you want to escalate and match their energy? What happens then? We just stair step, right? We just egg each other on. Versus trying to stay calm, you're actually balancing. It doesn't sound like it, right? You're not meeting them to create balance. You're balancing by counteracting the escalation and helping to bring things down. Because if you remember, one of the things we did point out in the last session is that the need to deal with an escalation takes priority above the message that's trying to be communicated. If you're there to talk about a project deadline and somebody goes through the roof because they're really nervous and afraid and they escalate and things get tense and you can feel the physical change in the room, somebody has to de-escalate before you can talk about why the project may or may not be late. You can't talk about that in that escalated state. So that's where the balancing comes in. And realizing like, oh, we're not actually going to talk about this right now because we're not at a place to. And you can acknowledge that the energy's changed, maybe go get a glass of water, maybe talk about the Vikings, whatever it is, that may be more frustrating. And whatever it is, it helps to kind of bring some balance back to the conversation. So that in a nutshell sums up the last session. All right, so there's more examples and things of people who go back and review, but that helps us remind ourselves where we are in this. And now we're going to pivot and start to look outwardly about how do we communicate with other folks. Before we do that, I just want to kind of frame today's session for you. This is a fascinating statistic that I don't think people realize the volume of information that's out there. So everybody sitting in this room, you process about 11 million data points per second as a human. 11 million. Only 40 of those 11 million do you have any conscious awareness of. So a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent, do you have any control over your reaction to or your engagement with that moment? Why is that important? That's important because sessions like active listening and this one give you information that does lodge in your subconscious. It gets in there. We're in there. And that subconscious information, that knowledge around how people communicate, what meaning they're trying to get to you or what their experience may connote, those things then train your subconscious to be a little stronger, a little smarter. You get out of your lizard brain, like we talked about last time, and your prefrontal cortex can drive the boat a little bit better. If you don't have some of these skills and you haven't thought about them and learned about them and practiced them, you're unarmed. You're unarmed for 11 million minus 40 data points. You're just going to let things react and happen around you versus having that subconscious be able to work through things with you and let you stay on a little bit more of an even keel. Does that make sense? Super. So why does the communication matter? Why does it matter how we transmit information out into the world? First and foremost, trust. We talked about trust a lot 2 weeks ago because active listening is a trust building exercise. You are focused on someone else's experience and message. That innately builds trust. There's no two ways about it. If you are committed to doing that, you will build trust with that other individual, period. Oh, did I go ahead? I did. There we go. Collaboration. Once you then are being able to build trust with somebody, then you're able to work with them. Without any trust, the collaboration is going to be very transactional. And what we don't want is transactional collaboration, especially in our personal lives. We want to be able to do more with our time with somebody versus 1 for 1, 2 for 2. We don't want that. We want to be able to do without worrying about what's coming back. Without trust, the transactional nature is how humans work. That's why commercial transactions where there is no actual trust are, this is the Coke, and Debbie gives them $1. Oh, no Coke today. And Debbie gives them $1, right? It's very transactional versus a trusting relationship might be, take the Coke, you can get me next week. That doesn't happen at Target. And lastly, the impact and the scope. Once we have that, your whole world opens up for you because you have the ability to do more with your time, with your relationships, with the things you need to get done. Your options become much broader. So that's the kind of stakes we're talking about today. And it's really, really exciting when you start to see these things flourish in your life. So that's kind of framing today and what we're going to go through. I'm going to give it to Karen now, and we're going to dive into the actual 4 types of communication styles.
Great, thanks. Okay, so just a review. This is the same slide we had a couple weeks ago about the brain chemistry, right? We talked about how the amygdala, which is in the back of the brain, by the brainstem, way back there, is in charge of keeping you safe from threatening situations, keeping you safe from danger, right? So that's what activates the fight or flight response. The prefrontal cortex up here is what helps us with executive functioning, thinking through things, problem solving, taking some time and waiting to respond, patience, being rational, making a pro and con list, okay? Now, the thing about the amygdala that's going to be important, even more important here today, is that there's 2 things that activate the amygdala. One is our fear of dying, right? Our need to survive. So if we're in physical danger, of course, the amygdala reacts and sends signals to our brain to respond to that in that fight or flight way. But the other thing that's less well known is that humans also have a need for connection. So if you think about that movie Castaway, right, with Tom Hanks, he was alone on this island, and that's pretty much the worst thing you can do to a human. He went so far as to make himself a friend, right? We had that Wilson, which was the volleyball. He made himself a friend because we don't ever want to be alone. We are tribal kind of creatures. And so we have this group of people around us, our friends and family, that we wouldn't survive without them. And so when one of those relationships is fractured, or we feel a level of disconnection from that person, that fight or flight reaction is going to occur in the same way. So when somebody doesn't respond to us, they don't get back to us, we think they're ignoring us, or they criticize us, they're mad at us. Those things set that fight or flight response off as well, because we feel like that person in our tribe, we're being disconnected from them, okay? And that's oftentimes what we're reacting to when we're in conversation with people around us. So our communication is absolutely determined by what part of the brain we're in. If we're in the amygdala, we're going to respond differently than if we're in the prefrontal cortex. So the 4 styles here, the first, these are all styles that you may have heard. I mean, I've taught this lesson or this workshop in all different settings. This is not something that kids learn in middle school or even high school, maybe not even in college, honestly. So having a work training like this is sometimes the only place where you're going to get it, and yet it's happening for all of us all the time. But these 4 styles are present wherever we are. The first is aggressive, then we have passive, passive-aggressive, and assertive. I'm going to go through all 4 of those. But the first 3, aggressive, passive, and passive-aggressive, absolutely come from the amygdala. That's what's driving our responses in those ways. The prefrontal cortex drives our assertive responses. So that's just important as a way to sort of give us a foundation for understanding why we're doing what we're doing. All right, so we're going to start with aggressive, and an aggressive communicator. Last time we talked about how there's verbal and nonverbal distinctions, verbal much less so than nonverbal. So I'm going to break down each of these 4 types into the things that we say and then the things that we do, okay? So you can see here, verbal communication, someone who's aggressive tends to use things like intimidating words or even swearing. If someone's swearing at you, calling you actual swear word names, they are being very aggressive. That is not really good at all. I'm going to just say that. If people are bossy or pushy, or they blame others, that's a really big distinction with aggressive people. People who are aggressive tend to blame everyone else for their problems. They have a really hard time taking responsibility for any issue that comes up or that's brought to their attention. So they'll say things like, well, you know, that's your fault. I didn't do anything wrong, that's on you. Or they'll use really general statements like, you always, or you never. And so it becomes always about the other person and the problems that they encountered. They also tend to see themselves more in control and kind of like at a higher level than other people. So therefore, they're going to talk and everyone else is going to listen. So they tend to speak more than they listen. And when they speak, they're often critical and demanding, again, that bossy or pushy thing. And it's pretty hard to be around that. Some of the nonverbals, the body language that you're going to see, has to do with the intense eye contact. They could stare at you or even glare at you. So obviously, a loud voice often comes with somebody being aggressive. They're yelling. But some of the other things, they'll slam doors or pound their fist on a table or throw something, maybe not at you, but kind of in the vicinity. Those are all very aggressive moves. They could also violate your personal space. They could get right up in your space. And we know what that feels like. We know our comfort level. And when people get too close to us, especially if they're glaring at us or yelling, it's very uncomfortable. And they can stand over other people too, rather than having a conversation one-to-one and sitting down with somebody. They'll tend to stand over and lord over people in a way that maybe they don't even realize. So we start with aggressive because it's kind of the easiest one to notice. It's pretty obvious if someone's aggressive. We all kind of know somebody like that, or we've seen somebody behave like that. But what's also interesting about this style is kind of the long-term impact. You know, what's the problem here? What is the gain? The first thing is that they don't really ever resolve conflict. They actually make conflict worse, or they start it, right? So they'll kick off conflict, they'll start a conversation, and they escalate it. So obviously they don't ever resolve the conflict. They might get their way in the short term. And this is an example of, you know, you could win the battle but lose the war. You might get what you want in the moment, but over time, what happens is people don't really want to deal with you anymore. Whether it's a coworker or a supervisor or somebody that reports to you or a friend or a partner, over time, treating people that way, people won't want to be around you. They'll look to move to a different department or separate if you're in a relationship with them. They'll just kind of maybe move away from you if you're friends with them. And so in the long term, it really does damage relationships, okay? So people might seem like they're winning in the short term because they get what they want, but they're really not winning in the long term with this style, okay? And also in terms of self-esteem, if we think about it, if somebody needs to be critical of other people or trying to put people down or make people feel small, you know, if I feel good about myself, I'm not trying to walk around making other people feel small. But if I don't feel so good about myself, then if I make you feel worse, maybe I feel just a little bit better. So ultimately, people who have this style over and over and over again, this chronic aggressive style, tend to not feel very good about themselves deep down, which might be hard to think because they maybe come across very confident or, you know, kind of loud. But deep down, when you have that type of relationship with other people and you're constantly, it doesn't feel equal, it doesn't feel very good, okay? So that's the long-term effect. For all of these styles, we have a video. So the next slide is a video. And in this case, we don't have any words on the video. This aggressive style, we could have a million videos to demonstrate somebody, you know, behaving or saying aggressive things. But I want you to watch the behavior in this video and just see what you notice. Okay. So in this case, it's meant to be funny, but the intensity of his behavior is what I want you to notice, right? Even though he's not saying anything, the intensity of, you know, slamming the washing machine drawer or, you know, blowing so hard, those things, when those things are happening, it's a sign that you might be feeling a little aggressive or you might be a little upset, and other people are definitely noticing. That's the thing. It's really easy to notice when someone else is behaving that way, but it's often less apparent that we're doing it. People notice when we slam doors, whether we do or not, okay? So that's aggressive. The next style is being passive. And again, we're back in the amygdala in this one. So the first thing I'll say about passive folks is that generally they don't say a lot, right? So not responding in groups, not weighing in on things on a team, that tends to be a very passive response. But when they do say things, they'll often do things like blame themselves, right? So that was my fault. They'll take 100% responsibility for a situation, and they'll really mean it too. And they can be dishonest. And what I mean when I say dishonest is using phrases like I'm fine or I don't care. Right? And the truth is sometimes you don't care, like where we have dinner or what movie we see, but not all the time. I mean, we all have preferences. We all have things that we want and don't want. But when someone never weighs in and never tells you what they really want, I'm a little skeptical, quite frankly. I'm always wondering, like, are they telling me the truth? When I'm friends with somebody, I'm waiting for them to say something to me like, hey, I'd really prefer if we did this instead. I'm waiting for that, because that tells me that that person is actually going to speak up when they want something. But if they're always agreeing with me, I can't really trust that they're not thinking something else in their head, okay? So that's kind of a harder thing to notice about being passive, because generally people who are passive are very nice. I mean, their goal is to be nice. Their goal is to not rock the boat. But that's that other side of it. That other side of the coin is that we don't know if we can fully trust what they're saying because of it. So another thing that you might notice is that they over-apologize. Now, not all passive people, people don't do all of these things, right? But some people over-apologize. They apologize for really minor things, and it can be kind of distracting, but it's oftentimes unnecessary. And these folks will listen more than they speak. Like I said, in groups, they'll tend to be quiet. They'll let other people talk. They'll let other people share their opinion, but they will often have to be prompted to share, and they won't share spontaneously. Some of the body language, they'll struggle making eye contact, or they'll look down or look away when they're having a conversation. They could have more of a quiet voice. Sometimes it might be hard to hear. You might have to ask people to speak up. Sometimes they can even have a constant smile or a blank look on their face. They're not really giving you much. You have no idea what they're thinking. Their posture could be hunched over, or they could sit below other people. If everyone else is standing, they could be sitting, things like that. So what's the long-term impact here? Well, they are definitely trying to avoid conflict. Their whole goal is to not rock the boat. They want to sweep things under the rug. They just want them to go away because, we could have a whole nother talk about why they do that, but it doesn't really matter here. They want to avoid conflict. It's uncomfortable. And so they don't ever resolve the conflict. It doesn't go away. And like I mentioned before, it can damage the relationships that they have, right? If people don't always know if they can trust them, if they're questioning if they're really being honest with me, then that's not exactly a transparent relationship or friendship. And then certainly it damages self-esteem. If I'm never speaking up for myself, if I'm never asking for what I need, if I'm not really getting my needs met around me, I'm not going to feel that great about myself. The thing about passive folks, passive people and aggressive people can sometimes be drawn to each other because they really complement each other, right? So people who are always right and very used to, being in charge and talking all the time will often connect with people who are the opposite, right? I'm used to listening. I'm used to taking all the blame. I'm used to, feeling like my opinion is not as important. So, little bits of that are okay in relationships, but if that gets to be too extreme, we find that there's real trouble in relationships with those types of folks, okay? So the next video is one of our Midwestern faves, Charlie Barron's, if you've ever seen him, and he is going to demonstrate one way of being passive.
Diane forgot to erect her wipers. Jeez Louise. She will be thanking me later.
Are you holding that for someone?
Yeah, there's someone coming. They're about half a block away yet.
Are you sure he's coming here?
I'd rather be safe than sorry. 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 Oh, sorry. Oh, hey, Bill. You forgot to shovel off your patio, you silly goose. I got you, though. Oh, you can go ahead of me.
Sure, you only got a couple things. I got a bunch.
Oh, no, I insist.
And you have a quick trip rewards card.
I do somewhere.
I got a rewards card for you.
Are you
Got
sure?
it. Yeah, use that. Go for it. Actually, you know what? Hang on there. I got a coupon, too. Just use my credit card, too. Here, just take my wallet. Go. It's slicker than snot out right now, okay? You will risk your life if you're going out on the road.
Aren't you in your car right now?
Yeah, I'm in my car, but I gotta go get groceries for Tom.
Oh,
Yeah, he ran out of beer, and I can't have that happening on my watch. Oh, don't worry, it's not that cold out here. It'd actually be warm if it weren't for the wind.
Okay, so I love that because it also indicates another version of being passive, which is doing too much, right? Overdoing things, doing things for people that maybe they didn't even ask you to do, right? He's holding the door for somebody, he's not even sure if they're coming to him at the gas station, right? So that takes a lot of time, a lot of energy. It's exhausting to always be watching and anticipating everyone else's needs around you, and they may or may not even appreciate it, right? So that's hard to sustain in the long term. Doesn't always work out so well. Our next style is, I don't know, the best and the worst. It's passive aggressive. It's very, this is a tricky style, and working with folks over time like I have, this is a tough one. Passive aggressive, there's so many ways to be passive aggressive. And the way that I can describe it the most succinctly is to say one thing, but your tone doesn't match, or you say something and your behavior doesn't match, okay? So the best example of this is sarcasm, right? So sarcasm is completely, it's a very mixed message, right? That's how we're gonna describe it. So things like, you know, actually I can't, I have them in my notes, but that's okay, I'll come back to them. So the other thing we want to talk about is gossip. Gossiping about other people is another form of being passive aggressive. And when I say gossip, I mean talking to somebody about a third person who's not in the room to make them look bad or to highlight something that they did wrong with no intention of going back to that third party, that third person, and saying, hey, you know, I have some feedback for you. So it's not about going to someone and saying, hey, I really want to figure out how to talk to so-and-so because they keep screwing this up and I want to just run this by you. That's not gossip. Gossip is really about making someone else look bad just for the sake of making somebody look bad, okay? And it really, over time, is very toxic, and it creates, you know, it stirs the pot, essentially. If you're talking about people and you're trying to make people look bad and spreading rumors about people, it stirs the pot, it creates conflict. You're also unclear about your own needs, so people get a mixed message about what you're asking for. And so if you say something like, it's fine that you were a little bit late. I mean, it's not like my time is really worth anything. Well, you just said it's fine, but then you made some comment to say that it's not fine. So that's the kind of vibe that you get. It's very confusing because people say things and you're not quite sure if it's fine or not fine. So they're being very indirect, and they kind of want you to guess. And if you guess wrong, too bad for you. Okay? So this is a tricky style. It's not as easy to notice or to address. I'll say it that way, to address. Some things about people's body language, eye rolling, right? That's a dead giveaway. That somebody is clearly unhappy, but if they don't say that they're unhappy or they don't want to do something, and then they roll their eyes, that's that disconnection, that incongruence. If they don't say they don't want to do something, but then they roll their eyes, they clearly don't want to do it, but they're not saying it. So there's the disconnection. Sighing is another big one. Teenagers do that all the time. I mean, adults do too, quite frankly, but sighing after something. These two are kind of interesting, like multitasking. So when you're talking on the phone to somebody and you're doing something else, maybe you're kind of done with the conversation. Maybe it's gone on too long for you and you're moving on to the next thing, but you don't really want to say something. So you're trying to get the other person to figure out that you're doing something else. Oh, it sounds like you're washing dishes. Do you need to go? You get the other person to end the call instead of you saying, hey, I really need to get back to my, making dinner or whatever. The other one is if you're in person with somebody, if you're kind of done with the conversation and you pick up your phone or you look back at your computer and you're checking things, and then they're supposed to also guess that you need to, the conversation needs to end. Instead of you saying, hey, I really need to get back. Can we finish this conversation later? Or can we just, wrap up right now? Or being something more direct, right? And then lateness. This always kind of bristles some folks. So not every time you're late doesn't mean you're being passive aggressive. I just want to say that. But there are times when we agree to do things that we don't really want to do. For me, it's like any type of shower, like a baby shower or a bridal shower. I just don't love showers, and I've stopped doing them now that I have had to do them for 20 years. I'll send a gift, RSVP no, but have a great time, you know? What a passive-aggressive response would be, though, is to say yes and show up 30 minutes late, right? I don't really want to go, so I'm going to avoid I'm going to try to cut down the amount of time that I'm going to go, but I said I would go. So the tricky thing here is thinking through this, because the choices are either say you're not going to go and just land there and send a gift and move on, or if you say you're going to go, you got to walk it back and say, you know what, I agree, this is part of my job, or this is part of being part of this family, or this is part of being part of this friend group. I just got to show up on time. I just got to do it because it's the right thing to do. But to do that in-between part where you sort of, kind of act like you don't really want to be there, but you still go, no, you're not, you don't feel good about that most likely, and other people might notice that and kind of wonder as well. So the long-term impact of this is the same, no conflict resolution. Conflict's getting worse, not better in this case. People are amping it up, stirring the pot. It certainly damages relationships. I mean, like I said before, if I'm in a conversation and someone's talking to me about a third person, the first thing I think of is, what are they saying about me when I'm not in the room? Right? I'm not going to tell this person anything because I know that they spread it around. Okay, so that's tricky, and it becomes harder to have good, trusting relationships when you're doing things like that. Also damages self-esteem because we're never asking for what we really want. Our needs are so unclear. We won't tell people directly. We're so indirect about everything. Cracking jokes or making it seem like we're not bothered by things that we really are bothered by, but it's so hard to say those words out loud, and people don't really know what bothers us. So that's all part of the way people respond passive-aggressively. And this is also rooted in the amygdala. Okay, so that's a very impulsive or instinctual reaction. So this next video is it's a woman talking to her printer. You may have seen her in she's a pretty big influencer. She's talking to her printer.
Okay, how about you print it earlier and I need you to print something else? Can't find printer. What are you talking about? I literally have been using you all day. I've changed nothing. Well, I've changed some. I mean, you could always hard on wait 20 minutes for me to warm up again. Just print. Not gonna happen. We're out of cyan. You don't need cyan to print a document full of black and white words. Yeah, there you go. Here's your cyan. Print the documents. Fine, here. Why are there so many pages? This was a 2-page document. Are those blank pages in between? Okay, it's not my department, okay? Take it up with them. You're the printer. You're the one telling it how many pages to pull out at a time. That's really generous, so you should thank me. Whatever, just print these two. Okay, well those are gonna need cyan. I already gave you ink. I don't know, it feels kind of empty to me. No, just print without the cyan. Can't. I need magenta. Just print it black and white. What are you doing? I left for 2 minutes. I need this printed. I can't write paper. Guess some of the card stuff documents she needs to fought with her for 2 hours. 18 documents she ruined because she just wouldn't do her job. When I said print something, she was like, I don't want to print something. I don't want to do this. Get it.
Okay, so this is I think a pretty funny way of exposing how, this is another way that we can be passive-aggressive is by slow walking projects, right? Slowing down how we respond to certain people, maybe not calling people back that we don't, maybe they upset us or we don't like them for some reason. That really jams up how we work together with one another when those things are happening. And those are kind of hard to pin down, right? It's kind of hard to be like, are they really just not getting back to me, or are they just really busy? So that's tricky. And so it really begs the question of we have to do our own self-assessment over time. We have to figure out how we're coming across, what it's like, what we're acting like to other people. So the good news is that there is a better way. This is our fourth style, and it's called being assertive, and that's our brain activity. It's up here in the prefrontal cortex. So what happens, what's different about being assertive? Well, we are using what are called I statements. And I statements have to do with talking about ourselves. They're the opposite of blaming other people. They're talking about what we see, what we feel, what we need. We'll talk about that in a little more depth later. People speak honestly, but respectfully. So you can be honest and mean. That's not being assertive, though. You need to be honest, but also respectful when you're talking to people about something that is coming up for you. They speak and listen equally, so they really want to hear from the other person. And they can introduce solutions, so they're coming to a discussion ready to help, ready to say, what can I do to fix this problem? I'm not blaming you for the problem. I'm saying we both have a part in this situation. Here's what I can offer to make this better. And they're certainly expressing curiosity. So what they're talking, they're asking questions. Tell me more about, why you did that, or why did that make sense to you in the moment? I really want to understand. They're not necessarily thinking people are doing things because they're lazy or incompetent. They're like, it made sense to you. Tell me how that made sense to you in the moment. I really want to understand. And then oftentimes we discover things that maybe they didn't have the full picture, or maybe they got misinformed. It's nothing that had to do with they were negligent, they just didn't have the full picture. But we can only do that if we're offering some curiosity, which was all of last time we were together with active listening. Body language here has a lot more eye contact, right? We want to be open posture. We can even lean in if we're talking to people across the table or in a meeting. We want to stay at the same level as whoever we're talking to, and certainly we always want to be attentive and not distracted. And here we have much different long-term impacts, finally, right? We can resolve conflicts when we come to the table with this different approach. We've thought through what we want to say, how we're going to help solve the problem, be curious about the other person. That's a much better recipe for figuring out how to move forward. It also helps us to build and maintain long-term, respectful relationships. Like I said earlier, if somebody comes to me and says, hey, I really prefer if we did it this way, and I say, great, I had no idea you wanted to do it that way, happy to do it that way, we start to have a little bit more trust in each other, that we can approach each other and nothing bad's going to happen, right? If I approach somebody and they respond, they get upset or they shut down, that's going to make it harder for me to come to them again. So that's going to impact our relationships in the long term. Also, when I communicate assertively, I feel better about myself. I have higher self-esteem, I have higher self-confidence, and I have higher self-respect. I feel like I'm doing what I can to address a problem. I can't control what the other person does, but I can certainly give my best effort, and I can feel good about how I tried to solve something. Okay? I can't always control what the other person does. I can never really control what the other person does, but I can try. All right, so this last video for assertive communicator, it comes from, what's the? Hidden Figures, right. So this movie is about 10 years old. It has to do with a scientist back in the 60s during the space race. And the scene is from her having a conversation with her supervisor and to see how she interacts with him.
Paul, what's happening here?
Mr. Harrison, I would like to attend today's briefing.
Why is that?
Well, sir, the data changes so fast. The capsule changes, the weight and the landing zones are all changing every day. I do my work. You attend these briefings. I have to start over. Colonel Glenn launches in a few weeks. We don't have the math figured out yet.
Why is it she can't attend?
Because she doesn't have clearance, Al.
I cannot do my work effectively if I do not have all of the data and all of the information as soon as it's available. I need to be in that room hearing what you hear.
Pentagon briefings are not for civilians. It requires the highest clearance.
I feel like I'm the best person to present my
You're not
calculations.
gonna let this go, are you?
No, I am not.
And she is a woman. There is no protocol for a woman
Okay,
attending
I
these
get
meetings.
that part, Paul. But within these walls, who makes the rules?
You, sir. You are the boss. You just have to act like one, sir.
So what I want to point out about that video is she may seem aggressive, right? Because she said something to her boss. She spoke up at all. And that can be how we feel when we come from a more passive place. When we're used to being more passive, saying anything can sometimes seem like we're being aggressive. And it's not that at all. I mean, you watched how she was respectful, she was appropriate, she didn't raise her voice, she had very clear requests. That's being assertive. We're not always on the same page with someone else. There are going to be times where we have to say, this is what I need, or this is what I'd like to happen. And as long as we can say it respectfully, we'll be fine. But like I said, warning, if you feel like that's not a style that you've practiced a lot, it might feel like you're being aggressive initially, but you're not. Being assertive doesn't have that sort of angry or like mean factor that aggressive communication can have, okay? So, the next, okay, that's fine. I was thinking this morning about, there's this dog in my neighborhood. I don't understand why it's always put out at the most inconvenient times, like 6:45 a.m., barking like there's a real problem out there, or 10 p.m. barking like there's a real problem. And I've often thought about going over to that house, but I can't go at 10 p.m. at night, right? I'm not going to go to somebody's house and knock on their door. But I thought about what I would say, right? Because in my mind, my first response is to be aggressive. What the F is wrong with you? And why are you doing this right now? We have a whole neighborhood, it's kind of tight. You know, there's a lot of people around. Why are you doing this? And don't you notice that your dog seems distressed? Then I have to think it through, and what I come up with when I'm much calmer is, actually, I'm really concerned about the dog. Why is the dog barking so much? You know, is your dog okay? So sometimes there are scenarios where a lot of times where our initial reaction is one way, but if we sit and think and pull back and say, how can I say this in a way that's a little bit calmer? It is more assertive, it's more curious. There's oftentimes a solution to that. So in this case, we're going to give you your own scenario, right? The scenario here is that you are regularly interrupted. So we're just going to say that's the scenario. So at your tables, you did such a great job with each other last time. Think of a way that you would respond based on these 4 styles. So how would an aggressive person respond to to being interrupted repeatedly? How would a passive person respond to being interrupted repeatedly, etc.? Okay? So sit together and talk for about 3 or 4 minutes, and we'll walk around and then we'll come back. Let's come on back. Good discussion. So what are some examples of an aggressive response? There's not too many, so what did your table say for aggressive? If you're being interrupted. Yeah, pounding on the table, right? Stop interrupting me. Yelling, probably, right? Get out of my office. Sure. Okay, how about how about over here for passive? What would you say for passive?
We thought that they would just like sit there and stare.
Yeah, sit there and stare. Or just have a smile and really say nothing, right? I mean, saying nothing is the classic passive response.
Or even go so far as just ceding the floor.
Yeah, go ahead, keep talking, right? Letting people go on and on, that's very passive. Passive aggressive, there's so many options. How about you guys? What was one of the passive aggressive responses you came up with?
I totally spaced.
I like that we're talking about passive aggressive. Everyone's like, they have the answer.
Like, if someone's doing a presentation, someone's interrupting, and you just say, do you want to do this presentation?
Oh, yeah, so do you want to do this presentation? If you get interrupted, right? So that's perfect. It's sarcastic. It's, it could be a legitimate request, but the tone makes it not, right? The tone and the words don't match. Good. How about an assertive response? You guys over here, what'd you come up with for assertive?
Kindly take the reins back.
Kindly take the reins back, sure. Would you say something in particular?
Like, thank you for that, but let me get back to my point.
Yeah. Thank you, but I wasn't quite finished. thank you, but I wasn't quite done. I have some other things to say, right? So you're being polite, but you're also changing the expectation. You're letting them know that you're not done. Good. All right, so getting back to these I statements. So this is how we're more assertive. There's a very, not specific formula, but these are templates that you can start off of when you're having a conversation. So you need to be in a calm place in your head already. You need to be in the prefrontal cortex to even think about this. But what happens with being assertive is that you often have to take a minute and think about, we'll start with the first one, the basic I statement template. When you, I feel. So what you're looking for is first you have to even identify the behavior that is bothering you, right? Sometimes we don't even know, we're just mad. We don't know how we got there, we don't know what happened. So that's even hard sometimes to figure out what made me mad. So once we figure out what the behavior was, well, my kid missed curfew and didn't call. Then you have to think, well, how does that make me feel? I feel worried. I feel angry, right? So thinking about those things for you, that's an easy one. It's pretty obvious. But sometimes there's conversations where you're like, I don't really know what made me mad about that conversation. And I have to go back and think about the point at which something was said that I didn't like, or I felt misunderstood, or rubbed me the wrong way. That could take a minute. But it's really the starting point for being able to put together an I statement and to come back to a conversation again with that person that you feel some sort of way about, okay? So a more complex template is the I see, I feel, I hope and expect, and I will template. And people always laugh saying like, Karen, I'm not gonna write all these things. I'm not gonna say this. This would be really weird to say to somebody. And I say, that's okay, but the categories are what's most important here. And you can say it however you want as long as you have these answers filled in. So the first thing, again, it's the same. I see. What's the behavior that's going on? In this case, you're late for curfew. I feel the same. I feel really frustrated since we've talked about this already. The reason why it's advanced is because you have to think about, there's another component to this part of it, where you have to think about what was the expectation that you set? And was it clear from the get-go? Now, in this case, I told you what your curfew was, and we've talked about it multiple times. So yes, I've been clear. The expectation is you're home by 11. And then beyond that, though, what am I gonna do if you don't meet my expectation? That's what a boundary is. The boundary isn't, you need to be home by 11. People think that's a boundary. A boundary is what I'm gonna do if you don't meet the expectation. I'm going to limit your phone for the weekend. I'm going to limit your vehicle use for the weekend, right? So the boundary is more, it's what I'm gonna do, not what you're gonna do. An easy way to think about it is if I say to somebody, you can't call me after 9 p.m. That's my boundary. I mean, people can do whatever they want. Somebody could call me after 9 p.m. But what am I gonna do about it? If that's my boundary, then I'm not gonna pick up the phone. So a better way to say it or think about it is, well, I don't answer the phone after 9 p.m. So if you're gonna call, you're not gonna be able to reach me. People get these things mixed up all the time, and it gets frustrating for them because they think they're setting boundaries, but they're really just setting expectations for other people. The boundary is what you're gonna do. It's that final line there. And sometimes, when we're with a peer or with a partner, we might not always be able to do something like we can with our kids, right? I'm gonna take your phone away. Or, somebody we supervise. You can write them up or give them a warning, When it's a peer, sometimes all you can do is say, I'm just gonna remind you of this conversation. I'm just gonna remind you that we talked about this. I can't actually enforce anything, but I'm gonna remind you that we had this conversation. So the thing about I statements, they're your best shot at resolving a conflict. They don't always work, but framing it in this way, using this script, again, it's a template, embellish it the way you want, is the best way to get what you want. Now, a lot of times people are going to feel perhaps criticized, right? Your teenager might not be like, oh, thank you so much for, reminding me about my really, really early curfew. They're going to be like mad, That's okay. It's still worth saying. Ignoring it and pretending like it didn't happen gives somebody the impression that you don't care, and that expectation isn't really an expectation. So even though you might not get a great response back, again, nobody likes to be criticized. Nobody's going to say, oh, thank you so much for pointing out my insufficiencies, but they're going to hear you. They're going to hear what you said. Please don't do that again, or this is how I need you to do it. They're going to hear that. People are far less likely to do that same thing again if you say something. Not saying anything, though, gives people permission to say, like, that expectation isn't real. I don't really care about it. It's kind of just there for show. And that's not, I don't think, why we put on expectations in our, whether it's in our work teams or at our home. We do care about those things, but we have to be the ones to say something. We teach people how to treat us, and that's one of the ways that we do it, by reminding them of things that we said to them earlier and not letting them just do it anyway and not saying anything. Again, we can't control what they do, but we can certainly make it more uncomfortable for them to do it when they know that it's affecting us negatively, okay? So that's what I have to say about that.
Okay, so you can keep it. We spent a lot of time breaking down the 4 types of communication, the 4 styles. We spent like half of our time that we have for you today for a reason, because as we now pivot to starting to working with those people, it's really important to understand the drivers behind how and why they present to you. And that's part of what we're starting to delve into here with the I statements. One of the things that's interesting about an I statement is that you cannot be wrong. I feel is correct. I don't care what comes after it. If you talk about what Karen did, you're inviting a disagreement. Instead of saying, when you interrupt me, I feel like my words have no value. That's objectively true, because I feel that way. So that's why these statements are so powerful and so effective at helping you deal with disagreement, conflict, difficult conversations, or difficult individuals. So let's go through an exercise here and talk about why. So tardiness in meetings, something we all experience, right? So if we look at that in practice, so you may be able to frame it as you're always late. How does that feel? I've labeled you as something negative. Right? That's not a way to hopefully have them come on time next time. They might, but they're going to sit in the corner and probably be ticked off about it. It's also fairly aggressive, right? There's not a lot of room for understanding there. And it's interesting, at the table in the back during the exercise, one person's assertive was another's aggressive, and that's very Minnesota. We're going to talk about that. But it feels aggressive to just label a behavior with no ability to try and understand at all. And very rarely is somebody always anything. Rarely. There's exceptions, of course. So instead, if we were to say, I see that you've been arriving late to our team check-ins pretty regularly. That's a little more room for maybe something to come back or some clarification, but you've at least set the context of the conversation at that point. And you've established that you're communicating your perspective. I feel, when you're late or tardy, frustrated because it delays the start of the meeting and it shortens the time we have to collaborate, right? Meetings aren't great. Nobody loves meetings. But in fact, if we're going to get together, let's get together and get some work done. And when you have people straggling in, it's disrespectful of the group and it's difficult to work together. Framing it in this way with an impact is really, really effective. This is the consequence of that tardiness. I would hope or expect that you'll join us on time so we can use the full time we've all booked productively. There's the boundary, right? There's the start of the boundary. This is what I am expecting from you in the future. And I will, here's the firm boundary, plan to begin right on time. And you can catch up afterwards if it continues. What happens there is you've now created a situation where it's very clear that you're going to start the meeting whenever the meeting is scheduled. And that person may or may not choose to be there when it starts, but you're going to start it and you've let them know that. And what's going to also happen then is that fear of being selected or deselected from the tribe is going to kick in. Somebody's not going to want to be left out of something. If you constantly hold the meeting for them, they're going to take advantage of that. And so here, without being threatening or labeling somebody as anything, we've established a clear understanding of what we're going to do in the future based on past behaviors. Put very simply, this is a technique called situation behavior impact. This is the situation. When this happens, it impacts the team in this way. It's a really easy way to remember it, situation behavior impact. And labeling this in a clear way talks about, when we talked in the previous session about separating the person from the issue, nowhere in situation behavior impact am I talking about the quality of you as an individual. It's purely about something happening that we need to manage differently. And these kinds of structures help us do that really, really effectively. So that brings us now to wrapping together the 4 styles of communication. And I think this grid does a really good job of putting everything in context, because our next section is going to be about how to interact with the different styles of communicators, because they're all out there. And so if we look at this axis, on the left by me, we have low consideration for others. And on the right is high consideration for others, high openness at the top, and low openness or kind of defensiveness at the bottom. Does it make sense how these are laid into this grid? Does that track? On the left, we have aggressive and passive aggressive. I'm not really concerned with your feelings if I'm either of those things. If I'm aggressive, I'm storming right through your feelings. And if I'm passive aggressive, I'm actually trying to kind of play them. I'm using them against you. And on the right, we have assertive and passive. Passive is not necessarily anything negative. It's actually got some pretty significant and important uses. One of the interesting things Karen's going to take you through is that 3 of these 4 have very valid situations where they should be used. And it may be interesting for you to think about passive being appropriate, and there are times when a passive style is actually the right call. And you'll notice that it has a consideration for others, it's just not very open. And that's okay. We'll talk about why. And then assertive, which is the standard, that's what you want to try and shoot for. That's clarity in a nutshell. Assertive communication is simply clear communication. It's not aggressive, it's just stating a need. As Karen said earlier, it doesn't mean that you can control how someone will respond to that need, but you owe it to yourself to be true to that. Assertive communication isn't mean. I'm not going to tell you you're a bad person. I'm going to say, I need you to be on time to that meeting, please. That's clear. It's not reflective of who you are. We still may go to lunch later. It's fine. It's just you're not great at managing your schedule. Doesn't mean I don't like you. So this grid is really helpful, and we'll send this out tomorrow as we did last time, so you'll have this. This is a really helpful grid to put these styles in context as you work through working with these folks, and that's what we're going to spend the balance of the presentation on today, and we're going to use that information throughout the 3rd session when we talk about how to overcome barriers, how to work with boundaries, and how to navigate difficult conversations. This is key because it helps you understand where people sit in terms of your needs and how they're going to receive them and listen to them. And maybe you can help somebody move somewhere else on this grid through how you react, because people do mirror and people do react to how you're presenting to them.
So our last video, it's just labeled #Minnesota Nice, and I'll let you see what you see here.
Oh, he's missing. Uh-oh, Scott.
Scott, you're a little off. You're off. Yeah.
There's a nicer way to say that.
No, I just want to make sure you heard me.
Yeah, but you didn't have to be so mean about it.
Was I mean? Did it sound mean?
A little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You just say, hey, Scott, I'm just wondering.
Right now you want me to say?
Okay, thought there was more, but really, he's about to lose his boat off the side of the ramp, and the guy's yelling at him.
Yeah, I think you might be off.
Well, I wanted to make sure he understood the urgency.
In Minnesota, we don't go there.
Okay, I thought because this thing goes off the rails. I mean,
We're
there's
okay
no,
with that.
I mean,
Crash the boat.
I'd rather crash the boat than be rude. Okay.
That makes sense?
I got you.
Okay, so it's just a little slow. I love that, right? It's just so classic. And there is sometimes a time and a place to just get right in there if there's an emergency. But if you're so used to not doing that, you might miss it and something bad might happen. So there's a little bit, we're going to talk about that more next. So the key takeaways from this section, learning about all the 4 styles, I know it was a little bit long, but there is a value in breaking them down separately and comparing and contrasting them to understand the differences because they all are very different. And we all 4 of them, Brian's going to talk more about that, at any given time. So with different people, we might behave differently. In different environments, we might behave differently. When we're in a different mood, if we're tired, we might behave differently, or hungry, we might behave differently. So there's more to say about that.
So let's dive into these styles and how we work with them. So as we said, it's a spectrum. There's that matrix, and we can live throughout that matrix, and we all have at different times exhibited those styles where you may not exhibit an aggressive style at work. You may be more comfortable being very, very direct with your kids, especially if they're younger and they need that immediate clarity, and we'll see why, maybe to keep them safe, something like that. And so there are a lot of approaches to how these things are used. They're tools. And the more you understand them, the more your subconscious is able to put them into use as you have the different situations come up and dictate what you may or may not need to do. And one of the things to be able to do is recognize these styles in the wild. So as you're talking to people, you may have the ability to see that somebody is behaving in a more aggressive way. It'd be nice if you're not in that kind of elevated state to wonder, like, what's going on with them? Maybe there's something there that I need to be aware of. You're able to identify and name that thing so that you can interact with it differently. And that way, the ability to recognize those patterns or being anywhere around on that grid is a really powerful tool in order for you to be able to not feed into the energy of a conversation if it's not productive. So you're able to look at these things that we've been talking about, and you're able to take those kind of key points that Karen had under each thing, and you're able to identify and name them so that you can then begin to build a picture of that 97% of what's going on and what's being communicated to you. 93%, sorry. The 7% of it is the words, and 93% is the nonverbals. So they're tools to be used to improve the effectiveness of communication. They're not necessarily something to wonder, like, which box do I live in? Where am I on that grid? You're all over it. You do have a dominant style, and we're going to talk about that shortly, but it doesn't mean you don't float around. So let's talk about how we identify our dominant style, right? You can do that with some reflection right as we sit here, just reading through this slide. The first thing to do is just observe your typical behavior in conversation. Do you tend to like to kind of be in a room and have the room looking at you? Or would you prefer to be sitting at the back table and hope I never call on you, right? Neither one's incorrect. It's just the way that you like to present in a group. If you're the kind of person who likes to be able to give direction or craft a plan and see it go to plan, you maybe have a more assertive or even leaning towards an aggressive style. It's not saying that's wrong. It's just what it is. How do you approach conflict? Do you avoid it? We live in Minnesota, so to what degree do you avoid it, right? And does it create like a literal pit in your stomach, or is it something that you actually flee from? Is it something that you have learned to tolerate, or is it something that you actually see as an opportunity to work something out? It's a huge tell in terms of what your default style or makeup is. What's your normal body language? Do you like to sit kind of closed off, maybe crossed legs, arms crossed? All of those are closing you off to the world. It's not negative, it's just protective. You're protecting yourself, you're showing the world that I need my space and I want it, versus being open. You're receiving information, you're showing people that you're curious and you want to learn more and you're available. And then lastly, if you have high trust relationships, possibly getting some feedback from folks. hey, how do you experience communicating with me? This may be with somebody you have in your family or somebody you've worked with for a while. I wouldn't recommend just, somebody in the line at Caribou if you want, but it'd probably be a little weird. And I would say you'd probably be more on the assertive side of the spectrum at that point. But asking people for those tidbits and that information, they see and experience you every day. There's gold in that conversation. There's also an ability to establish a deeper trust with that person by asking those questions. Hey, I'd like to know what it is like to work with me, because the more I understand, the more I can try and meet everybody in a more collaborative way. Imagine having that conversation with a significant other or with a child. Hey, sometimes we really go at it. What do you think triggers that? Is it something that I bring to that relationship? How can I understand what lights that fuse? Those are really trust-building questions. And you're going to get back really valuable information. It might not always be great to hear because it might conflict with what you've created in your head. We're all great in our heads, right? If only everybody could understand. Well, a lot of people understand a lot. And if we want to ask them for that and we're willing to take that and internalize it and process it, it doesn't mean that we have to change who we are because of it, but it really can provide us with valuable insights. So, exercise 2, we got to that one quick. We're going to talk about how we adapt our communication style based on the context we're in. So I want you to think about the different groups that are important to you. Obviously, this group is very important to all of you. You all see each other 5 days a week, spend a lot of your time together, and how you communicate is really the currency in which you operate with one another. Also, you have relationships at home. You have relationships with friends. Do you feel like maybe there's some subtle differences in how you present to those groups based on the context that you operate with them in? Kind of give that some thought and think about and ask the people at your table if they experience different contexts differently, like maybe when they go out to lunch with you versus in a meeting you're running or anything like that. And think about it in terms of not necessarily labeling somebody, but maybe using some of the I statements we talked about earlier. So try and start to put some of that into perspective. I see you, or I experience this, and see if you can start to work those muscles too, and we'll kind of double dip on this exercise, okay? So we'll walk around. If you have any questions, we'll do our best to answer them, and we'll be back in like 4 or 5 minutes. Okay, that was fantastic. Again, what I've said to several of the tables as I've stopped by is that, and this is not always the case in these situations, everybody's actually talking about what's up on the screen, not just about their day or what has to be done next week. So I really am grateful for the engagement, and there's obviously a lot of thought going into this. One interesting thing that I noticed as I went to different tables is the difference between work and the other areas, whether or not how we present is the same. And I heard a lot of, no, I'm much more reserved at work. I'd often not speak up. I'm not as apt to speak up. Heard it multiple times. So I'll just share this thought and leave it with you to think about, because this is going to be something that permeates the third session pretty significantly. When you are in a situation with folks that you see on a regular basis, so this isn't kind of like strangers out at the mall or something where your lizard brain, it went to sleep on me again, where your lizard brain is in control because you're not sure you're safe, right? I'm not talking about that. When you're in a familiar environment, or even in an environment in which you may be the expert, because at work there are certain areas that are going to come up where you're the expert. It is your area, you're there to do that job. And you're not speaking up, you're not being assertive. Anybody want to take a guess on I'm nearly certain there's never a universal, this is the only reason, but this is the predominant reason. What are we lacking?
Trust.
Boom. It's a lack of trust. Cultures with openness and the ability to speak up about facts and about the way things work and objective things, not necessarily subjective thoughts, have high trust. So think about that, and one suggestion was that we need to do a few more trust falls. We'll get there. The equipment's got to be out there somewhere. I mean, it's a fairground, so we'll do what we can to figure it out. But just be thinking about that. If you know an answer in a meeting and you're not willing to say it, think about why. And I guarantee you're going to trace it back to trust. Okay? Yes?
Is that trust that you will be heard, trust that the person won't think badly? What kind of trust do you need? Is it
So trust is, yeah, I think it's a little bit of all of that. So the comment was, is it trust that you won't be heard, trust that you won't be thought badly of, or maybe worry that you may be wrong, right? And then it's really the fact that it's safe. Do I trust that this environment is safe for me to speak up? And even if I am incorrect, it's not going to have a negative consequence for me, because the group is going to be able to surface that, and the group is really the thing that's driving the outcome. And I can participate in that group safely and in a way that feels good to me and helps the group. So it's a little bit of all of that. So now this is really fascinating to me. This is probably my favorite slide of the whole time, because we've been talking about assertive, 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 which in Minnesota sounds aggressive, aggressive, aggressive. But it's not. Assertive is just the term that's used for that style. But what's interesting is the other three styles, they exist for a reason, right? They're used, and if they were completely ineffective, they wouldn't exist. Humans would have evolved them out. But they have uses, especially when we want to worry about things like our safety. So if we look at aggressive, right, we're all in the fight or flight brain on these three, right? Only the assertive is in the prefrontal cortex. But if we have immediate threat to personal safety, fire in a theater, right, that's the classic example, then I'm not going to hope you notice that there's some smoke, right? I'm going to be clear with everybody on exactly what's going to happen now. I'm sure that there's ample times when that comes up for you, right? You have to be actually unambiguous about what is going to happen next. I'm not debating this with you. And that is for their own good too, because you may be the expert in the room about that's the only exit that's safe right now, because back there's XYZ and we can't go that way. So I'm telling you what to do. And that way we have the ability to react quickly together and get everybody out in an orderly way. Humans don't respond well to debate in those situations, right? We freak out. So let's not. Passive, a different kind of safety is at stake. Maybe you have somebody who's overly aggressive. Maybe you have somebody who is threatening you. This could happen in any context. That's not the time to get big, right? That's the time to find your exit. And the quickest way to do that is to not be threatening yourself, go with the flow, and just try and see what opportunities may present themselves without ruffling any feathers. Again, safety related, right? You might be dealing with somebody who is manipulative or somebody that is going to take your words and spin them, and you're just going to stay quiet. Like, I'm just not going to play that game because you've shown me who you are, so I'm going to just sit tight. I'm going to sit tight and see what happens next. Sometimes people need some time, right? If you're given some information that you were unprepared for, it may be a time to hold back and not react quickly. We're going to talk about that in a second, about how to process that. Because jumping right back in with a response might not be your best response. You might not want to go over and address the dogs barking at 10 p.m. It's just not as effective a way to do it unless you take a beat and see what might be best after you've had some time to process that and move the reaction to your prefrontal cortex. Passive aggressive, it's right on the crack here, so I apologize for that, but it says we do not recommend passive aggressive in any context. It's just not productive. Right, because you're actually being a bit underhanded, you're trying to undermine somebody, and there's no call for that. That's not a trust-building activity in any way, shape, or form. So there isn't really a good use of that, but it's very real and out there, so we would be loath to have left it off of our presentation, but it's not one you want to be practicing. Oh, yeah, so if you have an issue at discussion that you have no stake in, like if somebody's talking to you about the experience of their child in college, you might just need to let them talk it out. It really doesn't involve you. So if it doesn't involve you and you like this person, you want to hang out with them, then maybe just being a good active listener is all you need to do in that instance. You don't need to tell them what you did when your child was in college, or start a sentence with "at least" if you remember the last video. It's not going to help. So just listen. Just be a good active listener. So let's talk about what we do when we're out of sync. So these styles don't always jive, right? The passive person and the aggressive person might be a nice match because the aggressive is going to roll right over them. But passive and passive aggressive is just uncomfortable, straight up. Passive aggressive is fairly uncomfortable, honestly. But so when you're feeling out of sync, like we're not communicating, we're not connecting, it could be that you're at different spots on that matrix. And the two are just clashing and you're not going to get anywhere. So much like active listening, we talked about how to approach a conversation in the last session. What was the first thing we said to do before anything else? Anybody remember? I'm going to crack this group. We do it every day, thousands of times. We're just going to do this one with intent. We breathe longer out than in. 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out. A cleansing breath to reset our nervous system. So that is how we enter into this, to try and be conscious of what it is that we're doing. Right? We're bringing ourselves present and we're kind of clearing our head to say, okay, this is what I need to deal with. And then we want to look and see, can I put that listener somewhere on that matrix? You know, are they being assertive, which may be fine, they're being clear, or are they being aggressive? You know, we want to figure out where they're landing, because we can't control that, so they are where they are. And then from there, do we want to adjust our approach? The answer may be no. But if they're being really aggressive and we actually aren't feeling comfortable in the situation, we may just withdraw and either excuse ourselves or just try and kind of let them blow it out and move on. But you may need to adjust your approach. If you're generally a clear and assertive communicator, it may not be the time for that. And that's okay. There'll be another time for that in the future. But if you're not getting anywhere, if there's no balance, maybe it's not the time for that conversation. And then once you do feel like maybe I have connected, I've made it through and we've actually established an understanding of what we're trying to do, confirm that. It feels like you're really frustrated by the fact that so-and-so is always tardy to that meeting. Remember how that works? That reflective statement? It does one of two things and both are really good. Yes, thank you. I'm glad somebody gets it. Or, no, I don't like that they never bring any work to the meeting. They've not done anything. They just show up and sit there. Okay, I didn't know that. Thank you. Right? You give somebody the chance to steer that conversation. You are giving control to that person and making sure that we are sticking a post in the road to say, at this point in our conversation, we're on the same page. That's what those reflective statements do. And lastly, you can then adjust. So it becomes about the prep work, the homework. It wasn't about the tardiness for this other person. Okay, I can address that. And then you can commit to doing something and maybe establishing another boundary or having a conversation. But you have a new understanding because you adjusted where you were coming from. Make sense? So I'm putting a lot of the work on you all because you can't control the other person. That's a frustrating part about communication is you're 50% of it and you can't control anything outside of you. So you can't ask somebody, could you please be passive right now? I need to be aggressive. Right? It's, again, just weird. You can ask, but it's just weird. Yeah, and again, you're not asking someone else to change their style to meet you. You can pivot to meet them. It's a muscle. You do it every day without knowing it. This is just being a little more mindful about what's happening. This already happens every day in relationships. Oh, you went on. The last slide that was so good already happens every day when you're interacting with folks. We're just trying to raise awareness of that. And again, arm that subconscious. So when those 11 million data points are flying at you, your brain is like, I know how to handle these things. I got this. All right? That's really the goal of this. It's not to create a situation where we're overanalyzing and talking to each other. What style are you in right now? I know. That's, no, again, weird. So no. All right, so interacting effectively with each style. So how do we talk to aggressive communicators? This is one of the things we were talking about at one of the tables during the exercises. How do we interact with these styles when we do encounter them? Because we are going to encounter all four probably most days in our lives. So one of the things you want to do is, with an aggressive communicator, don't mirror that energy back to them. That again causes that upward spiral. We don't want to create that because the aggressive person is alpha. They want to be big. So if you try and be big, they're going to try and be bigger. That doesn't end well. It just goes like this. So try not to feed into that. Again, balance that out. See if you can balance it out by staying calm. It doesn't mean you have to sacrifice what it is you think is correct or what you believe to be true. It just means that you don't have to try and outshout somebody to do it. It might mean letting them finish their thoughts and then calmly giving your perspective. It may mean asking for some time to speak yourself because you haven't been able to jump in. Whatever way that feels comfortable to you as you think about it. But you want to establish boundaries, right? So if the aggressive person is personally abusive, that's not okay. And I'm not talking about just at work. I think we all know about kind of professional decorum at work, but this could apply in your personal lives as well. Nobody needs to be called names, needs to be pointed at, needs to have doors slammed at them. So I feel like you have no regard for me as a person when you slam a door as you leave a room where I'm in. First off, I want to point out that I was told it could never be done. And yet we have questions, so thank you. Thank you very much for putting some questions in. I appreciate it. We will get to those. If we do not have time to get to the questions, and that QR code will work as well as that link, we will put the answers to all the questions in the follow-up email tomorrow. So depending on time, I don't want to keep everybody long. So if we don't get to your question, it will be in the email tomorrow. The questions are anonymous, but whatever questions you want answers to will be there. So much like last time, we have now got, it's time out, come on. Wake up. I'll do it the old way. We have small group time now where you've got some prompts on your poop. That's why it's not working. I'm new at this. There we go. Okay. Karen handles IT for our company now.
No, I don't.
So we have small group time. We're going to walk around and help kind of keep the discussions going, answer questions if they pop up. Some prompts are on your tables. Really, I mean, this is to talk about the material we had today. The prompts are there in case you need something to kind of jumpstart the conversation. But if you have things that are creating value for you all and you want to talk about them, just anything about this material is valuable to everybody. So use the prompts if you need them. We'll give you about 20 minutes to talk, and then we'll take some questions and see where we go from there. But otherwise, just go ahead and talk amongst yourselves. We'll be out and about.
Do you want to switch the slide? It has the next slide has the prompts on it too. Yeah. Great. So. Great.
Oh, really?
I'm going to run the restroom quick. And I've seen the naked gun, so my microphone's off.
It is off? Okay. Great discussion. One thing that I wanted to say that I was in conversation with people, part of adjusting your style isn't about changing who you are so much as it is about you want what you're saying to get into the other person, right? You want them to hear you. So you're not, people say that a lot to me, well, I have to change who I am, and that's just not who I am, and I'm not an assertive person. Like, that feels weird. It's like, well, if you want the other person to get what you're saying, then you might need to adjust your style a little bit. And that often helps them think about, okay, well, I'm not really not being true to myself. I'm just trying to make sure they hear me. Because what's the point of talking then, right? What's the point of having a conversation if the other person's not going to hear me? That feels far worse in the long run. So making those small adjustments, changing a little bit of the way you respond, practicing those I statements can really have much better benefits for you and the people around you in the long term.
And I'll point out there was a lot of debate about aggressive versus assertive. What is aggressive, what is assertive? Because it sounds like aggressive is I just stating what I need. And it can come across, especially in Minnesota, and lots of talk about Minnesota, it can come across as aggressive, just stating what you need. So the way I would frame it for you is that the difference between aggressive and assertive is assertive leaves room for somebody else. And aggressive is just simply all about you. Yep, steamrolling. Yep. So just give it, if you give it that sort of kind of context on the backside of it, I think it helps to understand where they both fit. All right? As I said, they said it couldn't be done, but we have questions. So we're going to see if we can get to a couple, and then we will still answer all of them in the follow-up email tomorrow. So let's see. You want to pick one, Karen?
Oh, another one. How can you actively practice being more assertive without coming across as aggressive? It's all about I statements. The difference with aggressive, you did this, you let me down, you never listen. I statements are the opposite. I see that, I noticed that, when you did this, I felt this way. So it becomes more about you. So they're very much opposites, okay? So you're thinking about what is the person doing that's bothering me, and how does that affect me, and how does that make me feel? That's very different than you are lazy, you are not paying attention, you never help me, you don't care about me. Those are all much more aggressive ways of stating an issue. They all probably have valid roots, but we're not going to get very far if we're starting with a you statement. So that's an easy way to kind of start on that one.
And I'll tackle the top one. It is something that we work on daily, so I'll try and be brief. So the question is, what about your best suggestions for building trust on a team? The number one thing that a team can do to build trust is to sit down as a team and talk about how they want to work together. This rarely happens. And I'm not talking about solving a problem once it pops up. I'm talking about how do we want to approach things before they're a thing, because you don't really build a plane very effectively while you fly. So before things get stressful, before there's problems to be solved, before there's deadlines that have been missed or imminently going to be missed, talk about how do we want to raise issues safely, because then there's a contract. Then you've talked about, hey, if a deadline's going to be missed, we need to know within 12 hours of you knowing as a team. And we can decide if we need to get together. We can decide if we can solve it over Slack. We set these rules of engagement up so the team understands how you're going to work with each other before any stress is holding you back. Because if you're already stressed, then emotions are heightened and you're not going to operate as effectively. It's kind of like we talked about in active listening. If we're already escalated, then we're not going to talk about anything constructive until we solve the escalation. And so it's a chicken and egg problem for a team. If we don't know how we want to operate in a high stakes situation, then when it's already a high stakes situation, that is not the time to solve it. So you will build immense trust if you sit down with a team before things get rough and talk about how do we want to navigate the things that we can anticipate at least, because you're going to solve 80, 90% of the stuff just by having that conversation ahead of time. You won't map out everything, but you'll be pretty close. So that will go a long way. And in that is like being a good listener, being open to suggestions, creating space for people to offer up ideas about how to work together, being able to safely articulate your past experiences working on teams in this or other organizations so that you can have those things as seeds for what needs to be dealt with and mapped out. Does that make sense? All right, we will answer all of these in the follow-up email tomorrow. We've also got some videos to share in that are good follow-up and a couple articles to read just like last time. I'd encourage you all to keep practicing these skills. The engagement's really, really, frankly, spectacular from the group as we've walked around talking to people. I know that you're taking this in and you're processing it, and it's a lot to process, but it's worth your time and effort, and all your relationships in your life will benefit from it. So we will be here for questions afterwards. We're here to respond to the email tomorrow if you have any thoughts or things you want to share or clarify. And we look forward to seeing you on November 5th for conflict resolution. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.